Good evening. My name is Rodney Rholt. I am a doctoral student of Aspen University. This is a final assignment for the RSH course 912, Introduction to the Dissertation. Throughout this course, I selected a dissertation to be the basis of many of the assignments. The dissertation was entitled The Characteristics of Higher Education Institutions that are Conducive to Adaptive Change, written by Ben Thomas in 2016 as part of his doctoral program and dissertation from Azusa Pacific University in California. I'm very, very passionate about Thomas's dissertation that he had published in 2016. It's a topic that's close to my heart. I'm a dean of continuing education at a small to medium-sized college here in Alberta, Canada, in a city called Red Deer. And we're facing pressures for change, just like Ben described. So I'm going to give you a little bit of overview of the topic, a little bit of overview of the importance of the topic, and then I'm going to get into the methodology, the results, the conclusion that Thomas had. So, when thinking about this research topic, looking at the environmental characteristics of universities or higher education that is conducive to adaptive change, there's no more. This is a widely written upon topic in the last 4 years since this was published in 2016, and certainly anybody working or experiencing higher education in 2020 is experiencing a lot of pressures for institutions to change. But let's talk about those pressures for institutional change right now, because it'll help us highlight the importance of this topic. So, one of the things that Thomas did a great job in his literature review is really outlining those pressures facing higher education at the time in 2015 or 2016. And I really don't think any of these have changed. There's certainly new ones that we're facing now with the COVID-19 pandemic. But, institutions are increasing their tuition at alarming rates. Student debt levels are climbing. Provincial in Canada or states, United States governments are defunding higher education systems and reducing the amount of base grant funding. You're seeing student demands changing. You're seeing students moving into a model where they want a customized education model. You're seeing employers looking to hire people not only with a degree, but they're looking for micro-credentials that are embedded in those degrees. You're looking for returning students to higher ed who are looking for a micro-credential that's stackable and latterable. You're hearing discussion points about assessment-only credentials as we look to help individuals who have been displaced in a VUCA economy to be able to upskill and rapidly develop new skills through assessment-only credentials to pull forward their knowledge and to combine it with micro-learning campaigns. And you're looking at a digital transformation across higher education. Just with COVID-19, you've seen institutions go completely online, and now they're back to maybe a 70-30 online face-to-face, and models are different depending on what the COVID-19 case is in that region. You're seeing an increased demand for higher education. International students before COVID was a way that institutions would manage their budgetary problems, and you're seeing domestic students participation increase. You're seeing shifts in student demographics from ethnicity, cultural diversity, language diversity, socioeconomic disparity, and academic preparedness. We're seeing increased accountability being placed on institutions of higher learning. There's performance-based reporting measurements and performance-based indicators. You're seeing an increased scrutiny of the value of credential for the cost of tuition. So students are asking, is this worth the price of admission? But employers are also now, prospective and future employers are asking, is this degree actually producing the right quality and ready for work candidate? And so you've got all of these pressures that are leaning and pushing on a 400-year-old institution on the North American continent that is really change resistant. So whether you're thinking of affordability, expected outcomes, all of these have converged in unusual ways and putting pressure on universities and colleges and their leadership, faculty and staff, to change. This aligns with the adaptive change model. So these are adaptive problems that are changing almost every day and even quarter now. And so we need adaptive change models that change as quickly as the problems that we're facing. And this is kind of what Ben Thomas was looking at in his dissertation. He wanted to look at institutions who were good at this and why were they good at it? What were the characteristics that made them successful at this? And so he employed a comparative case study analysis methodology to study two institutions identified as leaders in higher education in relation to creating and implementing solutions to significant challenges. So these were two institutions that he believed were really good at creating solutions to adaptive problems, thus implementing adaptive change. What was interesting about his methodology design was he was looking at to find two sites to do this research, or two populations. He called upon the expertise of his chair and his dissertation team. Recognizing as a novice doctoral student and researcher, it would be difficult for him to identify two strong institutions that could do this, and so he leaned upon the expertise and promptings of his doctoral chair and committee, which something that I noted down several times in my journal to be able to remind myself to do that. But the overall research question guiding the study was, what are the environmental characteristics within a higher education institution that consistently produce adaptive change? And that was the question that Thomas sought to answer. And to answer this, he selected two institutions that were considered to be successful at this, and he conducted, during a 1-week visit to each campus, approximately 44 interviews with employees of the two institutions. He interviewed presidents, vice presidents, deans, managers, directors, mostly leadership positions, and avoided interviewing with faculty and staff, and really looking at the heart of the decision makers within the institution. As I said, it was a qualitative case study analysis, comparative case study analysis, that really wanted to understand the richness of these characteristics to pull forward. It was a fascinating study. Something that was really, really exciting for me because this is the industry I work in, and this is something that I'm passionate about. And so, when he described the environmental characteristics for promoting adaptive change, he was looking for institutions that challenge routines. He was looking for institutions that had a need or desire for continuous learning and improvement. He looked for broad organizational involvement. So it wasn't just the president initiating change. It was entry-level leaders, or individual contributors, as I call them, mid-level managers, associate deans, directors, VPs. So that broad involvement, and they were able to resolve really difficult problems, really adaptive problems that were critical to the institution. And so the two that he chose, I don't know what they are because he used pseudonyms to protect their identity. But he believed, and so did his research team, that they were really good at the change models of adaptive change. And so he looked at three broad categories of how do they motivate change, how do they implement change, and how do they sustain them, and looked at them independently, and then he did a cross-case analysis. And so, independently, he resisted the temptation to compare them until he had looked at them on their own, and then did a comparative case study using Nivio 10 software to help him code, cluster, and then identify the emerging trends. What was really interesting about this is some of the themes that came out of the three broad categories. So in motivating change, the theme of sense of urgency, executive leadership, responding to market forces, and high trust. What stood out to me in this, and what I found was significant, and so did Thomas in his findings, is that responding to market forces and the importance of communicating that through the organization. He noted that while deans, directors, vice presidents, even associate deans were very aware of the external market forces that were putting pressure on change, those weren't always intimately understood by faculty and support staff within the institution. And the institutions that were successful at this understood that, and they spent a considerable amount of time discussing this and helping the whole institution understand how important it was to respond to market forces. In implementing change, the categories were short-term wins, pursuing creative and calculated risks, expanding involvement and buy-in, and navigating resistance. In sustaining change, it was defining organizational stories, which became a major theme cross-comparatively. Change is the new normal, which was a major theme in a cross-comparative analysis. Reimagining the future and cultivating innovative people. These are really things that I'm passionate about, and the dissertation read like a story. While it was exceptionally large, it was probably 350 pages, and I read it probably almost a dozen times in the last 8 weeks. It's a captivating story. He really kept the audience in mind as he wrote the dissertation, right from the literature review, right into describing how the methodology and the research design, but also in how he unpacked the findings and made the recommendations. Really well written from that standpoint. The results of the study were pretty significant. It confirmed that the phases of change with the literature review. So it confirmed that these phases of change, of adaptive change, follow standard practice of Cotter's change theory. But it confirmed the need to create a sense of urgency continuum from fear to opportunity. And that was a really unique finding between these two institutions, how they understood that you had to both create a sense of fear in times of crisis, like we need to survive, but also the sense of creating opportunity to motivate people for that ultimate creativity and innovation. The other significance of this study really was about understanding and unpacking and encouraging failures. Higher education is very risk averse traditionally. Senior leaders, mid-level leaders, and individual contributors are really not motivated well to take risks. It's not incentivized broadly across institutions, but these two institutions that have characteristics of adaptive change really encourage failure. They incentivize risk-taking, and they found different ways, both intrinsic incentives and extrinsic, and it was really fascinating to see those two come through. And I think one of the most important things was the power of organizational stories as a significance, and the ability to craft and create stories that continue, almost a bit of a legendary story that can go and flow through the organization that people can hinge on like a rally cry. And the importance of not only it being told by the president, but being able to be told at the lowest level of leadership within the organization in their own words. And those are really the characteristics. Really strong conclusions of this study. Obviously, it's tough to make large generalizations for a qualitative study like this. One of the things that I appreciated that Thomas is he recommended that both the institutions selected were faith-based institutions, and that these characteristics may or may not transcend to a publicly funded non-faith-based institution, and so further studies should be looked at that, and maybe another comparative case study, qualitative case study at two public institutions. So that was I really thought that was a stroke of brilliance in identifying that. But I think really, it's really hard to create generalizations. But I think it did a great job of helping us understand yet another example of the importance of how we have to create change in higher education. There's a sense of urgency. There is a pressure to change. It acknowledges that. And the solutions that we used 20 years ago no longer apply today. And we can't have static solutions. There needs to be adaptive solutions to the adaptive problems that we have. And I think that was, one of the largest significance of this study and the recommendations and conclusions of it. So this has been a really great study for me to digest, and I've shared it with many of my colleagues. I hope I've motivated you to take a look at it yourself. And this is Rholt signing off for RSH 912. For the final assignment of this course. Thanks very much.